What did Lady Jessica actually think when she chose to bear a son? Haderach, her choice destabilized a millennia-old scheme. Jessica defied that plan, giving Duke Leto a heir, a rogue act, a betrayal hidden in plain sight. Her choice destabilized a millennia-old scheme, birthing Paul Atreides, a force the Sisterhood could not foresee. Did she grasp the cataclysm her defiance would unleash? Or was this a sacrifice she made blind, unraveling the Imperium's threads with every heartbeat? Jessica's betrayal was a blade wrapped in duty. The Bene Gesserit bred daughters to shape empires, not sons to become gods. Their puppet ascension fire but lives. The missionaria protectiva, their puppet strings, had woven messiahs into myth, but never this, a prophet who answered prayers with ash. Jessica's womb became a fulcrum, a daughter would have obeyed, a son unraveled the Sisterhood's chessboard. The golden path was a maze, not a road. Every religion they forged, every dynasty they plotted, shattered against Paul's storm. The Imperium's bones cracked under the weight of unintended divinity. What does a plan become when its pawn outgrows the game? The Bene Gesserit had spent millennia shaping a daughter, a vessel, a ruler. The Kwisatz Haderach, a being they believed could bind time's chaos to their will. Jessica's womb was their instrument. Until it became a weapon, her son was not the key, he was the lock, the mechanism. The force that turned the Bene Gesserit's labyrinth into a prison of their own making. Leto's blood carried their design, but Jessica's defiance injected wildness, a genetic spark they could not smother. They bred for control, she gave them unpredictability. Paul's visions were not their script. They were her rebellion etched in DNA. The Sisterhood's plan fractured not from failure, but from a single act of maternal defiance. A daughter might have mastered the desert's secrets, a son became its storm. The Imperium's bones cracked further, splintered by a god born of accident, not intent. What does a plan become when its architects are outmaneuvered by the very flesh they sought to mold? The text whispers through time. Asterisk, the breeding program was designed to produce a daughter who could access ancestral memories via other memory, not a son who would become a messianic figure. Asterisk, a daughter. The Sisterhood's covenant demanded a daughter. The Kwisatz Haderach was to be a vessel of memory, not a storm of flesh. The water of life, that golden poison, had always killed males. Always, until Paul Atreides. Jessica knew this. Her womb was a battlefield. To bear a son was to betray the Bene Gesserit's bloodline ledger. To survive the water of life was to defy the laws of her own body. She chose survival. She chose a son. What does a mother sacrifice when her child's existence is an act of war? Jessica's defiance was no accident. The Sisterhood's records show her obedience tested to its edge. A daughter would have bent to their will. A son, Paul's arrival, was a rogue variable. A crack in the plan. The Kwisatz Haderach, meant to be controlled, became a god of sand and fury. The water of life, lethal to males, now coursed through his veins. A miracle, a threat. The Bene Gesserit had no map for this. Their centuries of careful crosses unraveled in a Fremen's hands. Jessica's sacrifice did not collapse the Imperium, but it birthed the storm that would. Paul's messiahship was not their design, it was their reckoning, a daughter they could have shaped. A son they could not contain. What does a plan become when its architects are outmaneuvered by the very flesh they sought to mold? Jessica's blade cut deeper than flesh. The Bene Gesserit's obedience code demanded a daughter carrier of their genetic tapestry, but Jessica gave them a son. Paul, with his human soul unshackled by the Sisterhood's design. Aelia, the preborn, bore the price. Her mind, a storm of other memory, unraveled in the desert's grip. A daughter they had not planned, a byproduct of Jessica's rebellion. The spice in her veins, the stillsuit's whisper, the madness that bloomed like a sand-blooming flower. Paul's messiah crowns shattered empires. Leto Roman II, the child who wore a feline's eyes, mapped a golden path through the carnage. A corrective. A dirge, the Bene Gesserit's millennia-long weave, fraying at the edges. Jessica's defiance, a single thread pulled too hard. The cost, generations drowned in the tide of what was never meant to be. The desert remembers. It hums with the weight of choices that could not be unmade. Alias' voice, when she screamed, carried the echoes of 6,000 generations. The Sisterhood's gift, their cursed inheritance, now a poison in her blood. She walked the dunes with a stillsuit salt-stained chill, her skin a map of ancestral scars. A daughter born of accident, yet bound by the same chains as those she never chose. The Bene Gesserit had bred for control, not chaos, but Jessica's womb had defied their calculus. Paul's ascension was no accident. His visions, his Fremen following, the spice-fueled Godhood, each step a shadow of Jessica's first. Leto Roman II saw it all, the madness in his sister, the ruin in his father. He wore a thorn crown of necessity, his golden path paved with the bones of both Messiah and monster. To survive, he became what Paul feared, a bridge between man and machine, a god who bled. The Imperium's collapse was not Jessica's alone to bear. It was the price of a plan unraveled by a mother's hunger for agency. The Bene Gesserit would wait. They always did. Their tapestry, though torn, would mend, but the blood on its threads, that was Jessica's legacy. A daughter they never wanted, a son they could not contain, a path lit by fire and regret. The water of life hissed as it touched her lips, a trial of fire, a baptism of venom. Jessica drank, the text etched in the scene's shadow asterisk, lethal to males before Paul Atreides asterisk, was no mere footnote. It was a cipher. Her sacrifice did not just shape her son, it rewrote the Bene Gesserit's design. For 10,000 years the Sisterhood wove a tapestry of blood and will, a daughter, always a daughter. The Kwisatz Haderach was meant to be born of woman, not man. Jessica's womb, however, defied the loom. She bore a boy, a rogue thread, a fracture in the weave. The Bene Gesserit sought balance. Jessica gave them chaos. What does it mean to betray your makers and become their prophet? Paul's ascension was not a mistake, it was a rupture. The water that killed boys became a right for the man it could not kill. Jessica's act turned her child into a god and her enemies into relics. The Imperium would burn, but not because she broke their code. It burned because she made it irrelevant. The Fremen called her asterisk Reverend Mother asterisk. The Sisterhood called her asterisk traitor asterisk, yet the truth is sharper. Jessica did not merely survive their plan, she weaponized their faith, a daughter they never wanted. A son they could not contain, the water's poison became her power, Paul's destiny became their undoing. Did she know, as the spice-fueled visions took hold, did she glimpse the cost, a mother's love? A sister's defiance, a future carved from the edge of a blade. The answer lies in the desert, where water is myth and legends are born. The Bene Gesserit built empires on a lie. Their missionaria protectiva did not shape faith to find a savior. It seeded obedience to guard a lineage. For millennia, they waited for a daughter. One who would inherit the hive mind of other memory, a living archive of their crimes. Jessica bore a son. A rogue act, a spark in the dry grass. The Sisterhood's plan required a queen, not a king. Paul's ascension was not their design. It was Jessica's rebellion, a blade through their calculus. They had crafted gods from human dust, only to watch a boy become one by accident. The missionaria protectiva, that velvet hammer, ensured no ruler could rise without their imprimatur. Yet here was a prophet they could not silence. Their religions, their rituals, their carefully placed mythsol to train a mind they did not create. What use is a Kwisatz Haderach to the women who made him? None. He was a variable they erased from the equation, but Jessica's defiance birthed a storm. The Imperium's collapse was not their doing, it was the price of a mother's choice. The Sisterhood's hand remains. Hidden, unrepentant, waiting. Jessica's choice fractured the Sisterhood's design. The Bene Gesserit bred daughters to carry their will, not sons. A male heir was an aberration. Her defiance birthed Paul Atreides. The Kwisatz Haderach emerged not through their calculus, but a mother's rebellion. His path was never theirs to chart. Paul's visions, his claim to divinity, these were his own. Yet the seeds of his ascendancy were sown in Jessica's womb. The Imperium's collapse was not their doing. It was the price of a mother's choice. The jihad of Muad'Dib scorched 60 billion lives. A scion of Arrakis became a god, then a tyrant. The Bene Gesserit's hand remains, hidden, unrepentant, waiting. They did not foresee the storm, they did not stir it, they bore witness. To a daughter who defied, a son who rose, and a universe that burned, their design endures. The rust is ash. Jessica's womb became a battlefield. The Bene Gesserit had honed generations to breed a daughter subtle, patient, a weaver of empires. Instead, a son emerged. Not the Kwisatz Haderach they'd scripted, but a storm they could not name. His hair, black as the void, carried the scent of stillsuits and spice. A child born in defiance, cradled by a mother who knew the price of choice. The Missionaria Protectiva had planted gods in the dust of 1,000 worlds. They taught prayers, forged myths, starved populations into submission. Yet their own hands had sculpted the idol they could not unmake. Paul's voice, when he spoke, carried the cadence of borrowed scriptures. His eyes held the stillness of Asaich's hidden wells. The Sisterhood had forged belief as a tool. They did not foresee it becoming a weapon. Jessica's act was no rebellion, it was a wound. A genetic thread pulled taut, snapping the Bene Gesserit's careful loom. They had sought to master faith, but faith mastered them. Paul's charisma was not their design. It was the void left where their control had bled out. He walked among Fremen and emperors, a prophet with the bite of a scorpion. His followers saw miracles, the Sisterhood saw a reckoning. The jihad of Muad'Dib burned longer than any breeding chart. 60 billion lives in the wind, swallowed by the desert's hunger. The Bene Gesserit had feared a messiah. They got one, a child's unintended legacy, writ in fire and blood. Jessica's sacrifice was not a betrayal. It was a mirror. In its shattered glass, the Sisterhood saw the shape of their own hubris. They still whisper her name in the archives, not as traitor, as proof that even the most sacred designs can birth what they seek to destroy. They bred for a daughter to control the Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica bore a son, a rogue act. The Sisterhood's design, meticulously woven through generations, unraveled in a single choice. What if their plan was not a failure of execution, but of vision? They feared a male Kwisatz Haderach's messianic potential. It crafted a program blind to its possibility. Jessica's defiance, a crack in the foundation, let the light of prophecy seep through. The daughter they sought to mold became a phantom. The son they dreaded became God. Could the Bene Gesserit have foreseen the storm in the seed? Or was their design always a gilded cage, waiting to shatter? Jessica's womb became a battlefield. The Bene Gesserit had honed generations to breed a daughter subtle, patient, a weaver of empires. Instead, a son emerged. Not the Kwisatz Haderach they'd scripted, but a storm they could not name. His hair, black as the void, carried the scent of stillsuits and spice. A child born in defiance, cradled by a mother who knew the price of choice. The Missionaria Protectiva had planted gods in the dust of 1,000 worlds. They taught prayers, forged myths, starved populations into submission. Yet their own hands had sculpted the idol they could not unmake. Paul's voice, when he spoke, carried the cadence of borrowed scriptures. His eyes held the stillness of Asaich's hidden wells. The Sisterhood had forged belief as a tool. They did not foresee it becoming a weapon. Jessica's act was no rebellion, it was a wound. A genetic thread pulled taut, snapping the Bene Gesserit's careful loom. They had sought to master faith, but faith mastered them. Paul's charisma was not their design. It was the void left where their control had bled out. He walked among Fremen and emperors, a prophet with the bite of a scorpion. His followers saw miracles, the Sisterhood saw a reckoning. The jihad of Muad'Dib burned longer than any breeding chart. 60 billion lives in the wind, swallowed by the desert's hunger. The Bene Gesserit had feared a messiah. They got one, a child's unintended legacy, writ in fire and blood. Jessica's sacrifice was not a betrayal. It was a mirror. In its shattered glass, the Sisterhood saw the shape of their own hubris.